Siberia. Not that he was threatening me, but he was just coming out of hibernation, and I had been told that's a dangerous season. So I just lay down behind a snowdrift while he ambled past, and it was nothing really, except that I was very frightened, which doesn't often happen, actually.
So, any temptations at all, Julius, to go back to the old life?
Not really. I do miss the places sometimes, and you asked earlier the question, is it the places or the people? I think they're kind of tied together somehow. The places are the people are the places. I miss Afghanistan and Chechnya and places like that, but I don't want to go back to the old job. I'm very happy.
Well, I think you sound in splendid isolation. My thanks to Dervla Murphy and to Julius Strauss. Next week I shall be exploring the problems and pleasures of undertaking tough journeys with children. Until then, good morning.
The presenter was Sandy Toksvig, the producer was Harry Parker. For more details on the programme, the Access Package website can be found at bbc.co.uk/Radio4, and there you can also sign up for the podcast. In the 1960s, one way of selling more records was to record them in a foreign language, so pop stars were often found in the recording studio, helped by voice coaches, refining, say, boom bang a bang in French. Find out more in Pop in Translation next. First, a taster of Tuesday night's television.
Please, sir. I want some more.
Oliver Twist.
I thought it best to bring him to you, sirs, to decide what to do with him, sirs.
Punish him, Mr. Bumble. Got you a live one, Faggy.
Hello, my dear.
An all-star cast including Timothy Spall, Tom Hardy and Sophie Okonedo.
You'll do as you're told if you don't want to feel the back of my hand.
Bill, let him go.
A new adaptation of Oliver Twist begins Tuesday night at 8 on BBC One.
Now here on BBC Radio 4 we visit one of pop music's quirkier episodes as Mark Radcliffe presents Pop in Translation.
For most people, that record will be all too familiar and yet strangely alien. It is, of course, the Beatles' I Wanna Hold Your Hand, only sung in German. So what was all that about? Well, actually lots of artists from the 50s through to the 70s sang their hits, and occasionally their misses as well, in a number of foreign languages, the main ones being French, Italian and German. There are a couple of reasons for it, the main one being to sell more records. An early example is this song by Jimmy Justice about the true huzzah.
Though far away on a foreign shore, his heart is hers forevermore. Es war einmal ein treuer Husar, der liebt ein Mädel ein ganzes Jahr, ein ganzes Jahr. Und noch viel mehr, die Liebe nahm kein Ende mehr.
That was a translation into German by Larry Yaskiel under the pseudonym Lawrence Montague. There's no doubt that the golden age, if that's the right expression, of the world of foreign language recordings was the 60s. The beat group era would provide great fodder for this curious corner of the pop industry. Larry Yaskiel was working in Germany for Deutsche Vogue Records at the time, when a likely bit of business came his way.
One of the radio producers said to me, look, Larry, if you were to get your artist to record in German, then we can give you far more radio play. So I went over and told Pi this, and they said, at your service. If you want to record anything at all with any of our artists, it didn't cost anybody anything. I was there in any case. I used to stay in a hotel opposite Pi Records, at the Cumberland Hotel. I can't remember exactly the order that it went in. I think the first one I wrote was Sugar and Spice, which is called Zeus is Sie.
Zeus ist sie, Zeus und noch das Honig,
Pi records. Now, you've got the EMIs out there, you've got the Deccas, the RCAs, you've got the Deutsche Grammophon, which was Polydor. You know, we had the Searchers, we had the Kings, so every 3 months we had 2 records. That wasn't enough to compete with the big boys. So I realised I was doubling our output.
Tony Hatch.
Larry Yaskiel was the most influential person about the foreign language versions, because he was our representative in the European countries. So it was his job to try and get as much product released as possible.
The only person still in the Searchers who was there at the start is John McNally.
In the early days when we had our first hits, they did approach us to do some foreign language records, i.e. French and German. We weren't too keen at the time, and we decided to pass. And a couple of months later we realised that we heard that the Beatles were doing some, and we thought, well, they're not stupid, they know what they're doing. So we thought, well, let's go in the studio and actually record some of this stuff. And luckily enough, we'd worked in Germany, early 60s, so we all knew a bit of German, but in my case I knew all the sort of naughty German bits. But Tony Hatch and Ray Prickett, the engineer, who was at all our sessions, and they helped us right through the whole situation. I can't remember the foreign teacher at the time, but he used to take us through line by line, word by word, and it was just a fun thing. We would rarely, to be honest, we didn't take it too serious. There's loads of sort of mistakes we made, and lots of Mickey takes and doing your sort of accents and stuff, you know. And strange enough, because when we were in the Star Club Hamburg, the ladies liked our sort of Scouse come German accent, so we had quite a lot of fun with that on the recordings. And it's a pity they never kept the outtakes, because they'd have been very, very collectible.
It's a nice image, the vocalist being coached virtually word for word through a lyric he or she didn't understand. Sometimes they used the original backing tracks. Sometimes they recorded the song again from scratch. It's extraordinary that they went along with it for a few extra record sales. No history of the 60s is complete without a healthy dollop of the Beatles, of course. We heard a snatch of one of their songs earlier. So are any more Beatles songs translated? Here's how Larry got involved in the Beatles' history, with a call from the Teen Beats.
A phone call came from a German group in Mannheim, and they said they wanted to record 2 songs, and they sent me a demo of what they were doing, and I said, go ahead. A guy called me 2 days before the recording was due to take place, said, there's a record come out in England by a group called the Beatles called She Loves You. Could we record that in German? Would you mind? I said, no, I think it's a very good idea. I said, I know the song very well. It's just come out in England. I like it. Go ahead and record it. So he said, well, that's why I'm calling you. I've got a problem. He said, because it needs a German lyric. So I said, well, who's the German publisher? He said, I don't know. So I've called England, and they told me that the German company was called Aberbach. And the manager of Aberbach in Germany was a guy called Rudi Slezak, an Austrian who I knew. Told him the problem. He said, Larry, I can't get anybody to write the German lyric to it. I am the publisher, but I'm a publisher with the proviso. If I don't get a German lyric, I lose the copyright for Germany. I said to him, what do we do? They're going into the studio in 2 days. He said, Larry, write one yourself. So I said, okay. So I sat down and I wrote She Loves You in German, sent it to the group. They recorded it. 3 months later, the phone rings. My name's Dick James. I'm the publisher of the Beatles, and the Beatles are going to record She Loves You in German. What right did you have to go and write a lyric to it? So I said, well, Mr. James, because I believed in your record in German, the song in German, before you did, because had you believed that the Beatles were going to record it, why did you ask your German publisher to go and get you a recording in German? Oh.
George Martin recalls how this happened, or in fact, nearly didn't.
Germany, although they'd issued the record or so of the Beatles, the record manufacturers over there were quite adamant, saying that Germany was a very peculiar market and they couldn't possibly hope to sell any Beatle records unless they were performed in German. I didn't know the German record market well enough, and the Beatles didn't like the idea of recording in a foreign language. And I'd asked them to appear at the EMI studios one afternoon, and I got there with this German fellow who came over to coach them in the language. And when the time came, I think it was about 4 o'clock, there was no sign of them at all. So I rang the hotel, and I spoke to their road manager. He said, "Oh, they're having tea, they're not going to come." I was absolutely livid. So I hopped in a cab together with the German, and I tore back to the George Cinq Hotel. As I burst in the room and yelled at them, they all fled to corners of the room. The place disintegrated, and there wasn't anyone left at the table except Jane Asher pouring tea, except the mop head was sort of in a different corner of the room. And I said, "You know, you really owe this fellow a great apology, because he's coming all the way over from Germany. So say you're sorry." And they sort of, in their cheeky Liverpool way, said, "Oh, sorry, oh, sorry." And of course, after that, they came and did this record at the studios. They still didn't like doing it very much, but they did it. And that was the very first time I ever had a row with them, and probably about the only time, I think.
Let's look at the translation. They had to work their way round the metre and meaning of the original song. Here's a verse of the original She Loves You. "You think you lost your love? Well, I saw her yesterday. It's you she's thinking of, and she told me what to say." And then translated into German and back into English. "You think she only loves me? Yesterday I saw her. She only thinks of you, and you should go to her." Not quite the same, is it?
Let me explain something. My German wasn't good enough to be fluent. You have to be a native of a country to be able to write a really fluent, flowing lyric. So all my German lyrics, I had the feeling that I knew what I wanted to write, and I always had somebody to better them out afterwards, to make it better, you know, to write the German better. So he said, "Well, we're going to have to get somebody to rewrite part of the lyric, because not all of it is what I wanted." So I said, "All right." He said, "It'll be no difference to you." The producer was a man called Otto Daimler, who was a good friend of mine, and he was the EMI producer. He produced Cliff Richard, Lucky Lips. He recorded that in Germany, called Helen Shapiro, Alma Cogan, all those people in Germany. He knew what he was doing, and he got on the phone. He said, "Larry, it's all right." He said, "You'll still be the co-writer of the German lyric." So I said, "With pleasure, go ahead and do it." So that's how I got to write She Loves You.
So far, we've been looking at German translations, but there was a lot going on in French and Italian too. And it seems like there were other reasons for translations. Jennifer Sharp is a reporter for National Public Radio in the USA.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, these artists were trying to compete with cover versions of their own songs in other languages. And, I mean, I know that in Italy, there was this thing that started in 1951 and was really big throughout the 60s called the San Remo Music Festival. And it was a precursor to the Eurovision Song Contest. And there would be 2 performances of each song, and one would be singing in Italian, not in their native tongue. And apparently a lot of these English-speaking artists they just bombed in Italian. But a lot of the people who won the San Remo Music Festival competitions would really stay on the charts in Italy for months, you know, so it was a big deal.
The Eurovision Song Contest makes for an interesting diversion. Entries were sung in the language of the country of origin. This in turn persuaded British contestants of the need to sing their entries in various languages. And if you've ever wondered what the inspired lyrics of Lulu's Boom Banga Bang sound like in French or Italian, and I'm sure you have, well, here goes. Throughout the 60s, a key voice in the world of pop was lead singer with Manfred Mann, Paul Jones.
Our manager said, "You've got to go in and redo the vocal." And I said, "There's nothing wrong with the vocal." No, he said, "No, there's nothing wrong with the vocal, but it's not in German," and they wanted in German as well. And they just came up with the thing. And I had O-level German, so I didn't need much coaching as far as the pronunciation was concerned. But that was all I knew about it. Suddenly, the German market had decided that they wanted to do that. There was a song called Sie, which is an accurate translation of its English title, which was She. The other one was a German version of Come Tomorrow.
Pretty baby, wunderschön. Pretty baby, du bist jung, viel zu jung, zu weinen. Sagt ein Boy auch goodbye, dann lass ihn gehen und verzeih. Nur keine Tränen, gib ihn frei. Pretty baby.
Come Tomorrow was the English hit, and it was translated into German as Pretty Baby. Which is, at least it occupies the same amount of syllables. I would have thought they could get closer to the original title. It's not always easy to do a performance of a song in a foreign language. You know, I'm sure I didn't know what each line meant, and I'm sure that I didn't sing it as well in terms of interpreting the lyric as I sang the English language version, which is something I would slightly regret, more than slightly even. But I don't have any abiding memory of the session. It was just like a job for me. Didn't Mick Jagger have to do some Stones tracks?
Il sole sta per tramontare, dei bimbi corrono a giocare, bisi che sorridono ed io son qui.
That was, of course, As Tears Go By in Italian. For Paul Jones and John McNally, this was all just part of what a jobbing singer had to do. Someone who was big in the UK, but who also had a considerable reputation abroad, is Petula Clark.
A girl called Dalida was a big star in France. One of the reasons why she was a big star is because she was recording my songs, like With All My Heart and Alone, which was also another hit for me. She was recording them in French. And eventually the man who was supposed to be taking care of my records in France, he called me and said, you know, why don't you come to France and maybe record in French and perform a little in France? Because it seems silly that somebody else is doing this with your material. And that's why I went to France, just for one night, actually, a big concert in Paris. And that was the start of it.
On reverra s'en aller le cortège des jolis rêves perdus, et tournera le manège des amours défendus.
There is, though, a suggestion that the foreign markets enjoyed the sound of British singers struggling to sing in unfamiliar languages. Tony Hatch.
When I listen to Petula Clark singing in French, to me it's absolutely perfect. But even the French people say that she has something different about it, which is magic for them. And I think that's very interesting.
Broadcaster and writer Tony Curry has had a hunt in his collection for us.
She was, of course, greatly influenced by the fact that she'd married a Frenchman and gone to live in France, and had discovered that the French loved her, and she was making hit records in France. And there was a point, in fact, where she didn't want to come back and do any more records in English. But in actual fact, she came back to the UK to do one more record with Tony Hatch. She wasn't involved in the French stuff, but she did one more record with Tony Hatch. And in actual fact, at that session, Tony pulled a song out of the bag that he'd written for the Drifters, and that was Downtown, and it was that persuaded her to stay and record in the UK, and the rest, of course, as they say, is history.
When you're alone and life is making you lonely, you can't always go downtown. When you've got worries, all the noise and the hurry seems to help, I know. Downtown, just listen to the traffic in the city. Linger on the sidewalk where the neon signs are pretty. How can you...
When Petula Clark came out with Downtown in England, I heard it 2 weeks earlier than anybody else. And I phoned London straight away and I said, this is an out-and-out smash in Germany, in English, and it'll be an out-and-out smash in German as well. I said, we'd like to record it with Petula Clark in German. So they said, we haven't got a lyric. So I said, do you mind if I write it? He said, the greatest of pleasure. So here I was writing Downtown. It went to #1 in English, and it went to #1 in German.
Bist du allein, weil keine Blicke dich grüßen, dann geh in die Stadt. Downtown.
I called the headquarters of the French company, and they decided they got the rights for her to sing it in French first, and they recorded it with her in Spanish and Italian. It went to #1 in all those countries. I'm not saying it wouldn't have gone without me, but I don't know if they would have recorded it, because a publisher would have thought he's doing a good job to give it to a Nana Muscuri or to a Caterina Valente, because they all sold millions of records in those days.
No songwriters were immune. Dylan, Bacharach and David, Goffin and King, Lennon and McCartney all had their works translated and reinterpreted. So what did the writers of the original songs think about all this? Downtown's composer, Tony Hatch.
I don't believe people were consulted very much at all. We all want to make money. The music publisher enters into what they call a sub-publishing arrangement. So we start off with the song registered in Great Britain, and then the song needs to be published in, say, Germany. There's a little office who will undertake to promote, to collect the royalties, and also, if necessary, to organise translations of English songs. When I say English songs, I mean actually songs in English, right? You know, obviously American songs as well. But the writers very rarely come into it. We're just too busy working on something else.
There are websites devoted to this stuff. Go and see for yourself after the programme. They have the picture sleeves, and today there are many enthusiasts and collectors. By the late 60s, the music industry was changing. People were buying more albums, and the globalisation of English as pop's first language was spreading. There were some stragglers, though, such as a version of the Beatles' Get Back in German, which only surfaced recently, and an exquisite version of Space Oddity, sung in Italian by David Bowie. Here's Jennifer Sharp again.
I listened to it for a couple years, just assuming it was a literal translation of Space Oddity. But actually, they had somebody write completely different lyrics, and what he's singing about in Italian it's this kind of melodramatic love song. There's something about David Bowie's voice and then the Italian language together that just heightens the Bowie mystique, you know? And then just the fact that he doesn't speak Italian, and he just throws himself into it so wholeheartedly, really with just this aspiration to sell records. You know, just the combination of things makes it really absurd and beautiful and kind of transcendent in this ridiculous way.
I've got the whole lyric translation in front of me here. Priceless. This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade, and the papers want to know whose shirts you wear. Now it's time to leave the capsule if you dare. And the same bit into Italian and back out the other side. Tell me, lonely boy, where are you going to? Why so much pain? You lost without doubt a great love, but the city is full of loves. You sure that's the same song? Not entirely. They have changed the title as well to Lonely Boy, Lonely Girl. I think I'll stick with the original. The royalty split for these translations was pretty generous. For the creators, it's generally 50% for the melody, 50% for the lyric. In the translations, the translator shared the lyric part of the royalty with the original writer, 25% of the total. It's not bad, is it? And there's more. At the time, this applied to sales and airplay of that song in the translated language and in English. Not surprisingly, the law did change later, and the original language recording didn't qualify, which seems like a victory for common sense, really. You can't imagine Mick Jagger being thrilled to give half of his lyric writer's royalty away to some bloke who'd translated Satisfaction into Italian.
Perché sai negli occhi miei c'è un angelo che ormai non vola più, che ormai non vola più, che ormai non vola più. C'è i colori della vita.
Journalist in Germany has devoted a great deal of time to the subject of German translations, and he's compiled over a dozen CDs for the Bear family label with a total of about 300 songs. He's also put together a lavish book telling the story.
In 1998, I got a letter from Germany from a guy called Burt Bacharach. He was the German editor of Rolling Stone in German, and he wrote me a letter and he said, "I'm writing a book about English and American artists who recorded songs in German, and your name comes up again and again and again." I'll just tell you something very interesting about that book. He has a list in there of how much collectors pay for old German language recordings by English people. This came out in February 2007. The second most sought after is Zeus's Sea by the Searchers, which sells for, I think, €343 a copy, and The Sorrows, Take a Heart, which sells for €40 less. So we're talking 45 years later, these things really meant something.
And the most valued one is an interview with the Bee Gees, apparently. Of the 30 or so songs Larry wrote, Downtown was probably the most successful, followed by Needles and Pins and Sugar and Spice. Downtown was a million seller in each language. She Loves You did pretty well. Needles and Pins sold 120,000 in English and 25,000 in German. Larry's legacy was a career in the music business, starting with a partnership with Robert Stigwood and eventually running A&M Records, then Warner Brothers Records in the UK. But was there a legacy for any of the artists? John McNally.
Our territories are all around the world now, and France and Germany. We do Germany quite a lot. So in hindsight, they were very, very clever because they sold all our records over there and opened those territories up for us, which we still do today.
Will sie mich verstehen, doch dann hat sie die Träume, nur von Needles and Pins,
This has been a brief dip into a quirky part of pop music's past. Artists from the Beatles to Dusty to Bowie in the UK, from Johnny Cash to Frank Zappa in the US were willing participants. The pop business has changed since the foreign language recordings heyday of the 60s. Despite music business practices still managing to be pretty contentious here and there, it's lost a lot of its eccentricities and characters. And though it's probably fairer, it's duller. And what a tragedy that we'll never again witness such glories as Boom Banga Bang in French.
Pop in Translation was presented by Mark Radcliffe. The producer was Robert Noakes at Neon Productions for BBC Radio 4. One marriage in 3 breaks down. So, how do the other two survive? Well, a new BBC Radio 4 series asks 3 couples to examine their relationship under the microscope of a clinical psychologist. From the nitty-gritty of daily life to surmounting crises and resolving conflict, she'll be trying to uncover what sets a happy relationship apart. In the first programme, we hear about Gordon and Ellen. Their marriage should have been doomed from the start. They had no positive family role model.